All right. Hello. Welcome to this webinar on the best practices in swine nutrition. I'm Victor Ayo. I'm a swine production consultant, founder of Pig Farms Nigeria, based in Nigeria. So, essentially, this webinar covers some of the introductory aspects of swine nutrition. It's going to be divided into two installments, which means on your content on your screen now, we won't cover the entirety of our content. The course will be divided into two, okay, and then the second part will be in a different recording. Okay, so what we are going to do basically in this particular video, we'll take care of the introductory aspect of swine nutrition, why swine nutrition is important, and the pillars of efficient and profitable swine nutrition. We'll talk about the basic nutrient needs of pigs. We'll also talk about the nutrient requirements of pigs based on their physiological states. In the next installment of this video, we'll go into feed alternatives for pigs, the strategy to deploy feed ingredients for efficient feed intake and conversion, and then we'll make some recommendations in the concluding remarks. So if you want to follow up with the next installment of this video, make sure you like and follow this page, turn on your notifications so that when the next video drops, you'll be notified duly. Alright, so let's quickly look at the introductory part of this webinar, which is some swine nutrition, best practices in swine nutrition. So the question is, why is swine nutrition very important? The reality is feeding pigs, or the cost that you will incur in feeding pigs, accounts for more than 75% of production cost in pig farming. Okay, so as a pig farmer, you are going to incur a number of costs in terms of building, in terms of management and other administrative expenses, but none comes as close as the one you will incur in feeding pigs. Okay, so if you are going to spend that much on nutrition, then you need to get it right. Okay, so the reality is the pressure a lot of farmers face in terms of getting or finding the right solution to feeding pigs leads them to adopt a lot of wrong practices. A lot of farmers go to the internet to find the best feed formulation to feed their pigs, when in reality there is no ideal type feed formulation for pigs. So what can work for me, or what may work for me, will definitely not apply to you, and so on and so forth. The reason being that there is a whole lot of differences. Every farmer has a unique situation in terms of farm head size. Okay, so basically we have been able to group why no feed formulation can apply to two different type of farmers. Okay, because of course there will always be differences in farm head size. For instance, a farmer that has 10 pigs or 10 to 20 pigs, okay, and then another farmer has about 500 to 1000. So the farmer that has about 10 to 20 pigs can easily assess some raw materials, some feed waste, and a whole lot of these things that can help him manage to feed his pigs, while someone who has about 500 pigs will find it difficult to find volume of waste products that they can actually use or incorporate in his feeding program. So that's why there is no ideal type feed formulation, more so because of the issue of location. So in Nigeria, farmers who reside in northern area that is predominantly agrarian, okay, where they can find some of the raw feed materials on cheap, okay, may find certain feed ingredients which those in southern Nigeria may find too expensive. So location plays a big role in determining access to feed ingredients, and also the extent of inclusion of certain feed ingredients in your feed composition. Okay, and then also you have to look at the issue of farm business goals. Every farmer has a unique type of business operation that they run. Some farmers run their farms as breeding farms, where they sell animals or they sell winners or quality breeders. The kind of investment that they would make in feeding their pigs may be targeted towards lactating feed and starter feed. But other farmers that have farm pigs for fattening or for finishing will have to diversify their feeding program to account for growing stages of pigs and as well as the finishing stages of pigs. So these are some of the reasons why you have why the no ideal type feed formulation exists. But essentially, regardless of the circumstances, there are basically three pillars on which efficient and profitable swine nutrition is anchored. The first pillar, of course, is the ability to understand the nutrient needs of pigs and their physiological condition. So, essentially, you need to, as a pig farmer, understand the nutrient needs, what kind of nutrients that the pig needs to grow to their to fulfill their genetic capacity. You need to understand the nutrient needs of pigs. Just like for human beings, when we talk about the concept of balanced diet, there are certain nutrients that a human being needs to be able to grow properly. So, for the same thing applies for pigs. They have certain nutrient needs that they also need to grow and perform their function. But outside of that, you should be able to apply these nutrient needs based on their physiological condition. So, a pig, a starter pig, for instance, might have a different nutrient requirement to a grower pig or a finisher pig or even a lactating pig for that matter. So, you need to, as a pig farmer, understand the nutrient needs of pigs based on their physiological condition. The second pillar, of course, is you need to be able to find quality feed ingredients. Now, I like us to underline the word quality because profitable pig farming, of course, is hinged on quality feeding. So, it's not everything, and of course, the allure of pig farming is the ability for pigs to consume anything and everything. But in reality, if you have if you are approaching pig farming as a business and you have certain farm targets, what you should be looking for is quality feed ingredients as well as quality feed ingredient alternatives. Okay, if you want to apply industry waste products or byproducts to feed in your pigs, you should be able to find the best of these byproducts and understand what these byproducts are bringing to the table in terms of supplying the nutrients that the pigs require for good growth. And then the last pillar, of course, is to find the best strategy to deploy these feed ingredients for efficient feed intake and conversion. What is important? What is really important is that feed intake and conversion, or how well your animals grow, is as much a thing about quality of feed ingredients as well as it is about environmental factors. So, we may talk about the quality of feed, but if you are overstocking, for instance, you may not be able to achieve your production goal because of the intense competition for feed materials. Also, there are also a number of environmental factors that can affect feed intake and conversion positively or negatively. So these are some of the things that we will be able to capture in this webinar. And take note that this webinar is divided into two parts, so you need to follow up for the second part where most of these issues will be discussed in depth. So quickly, let's quickly look at the basic nutrients of pigs. We have carbohydrates, which is energy giving feed ingredients. These are energy feed ingredients, and the pigs require good quantities of these ingredients to enable them function properly and carry out their daily activities. And also, in specific cases, some pigs require more energy, some pigs require moderate level of energy that will be sufficient for them to carry out their functions. Of course, in the course of this webinar, we'll go into this. So, I understand that we tend to use the word carbohydrate and energy interchangeably, but what we understand is that energy is as a result of the oxidation of carbohydrates. So, of course, both of them means one and the same thing in praxis. All right. So, what are the sources of energy? We have things like maize, we have cassava, we have wheat, we have barley, we have potatoes. So when we talk about sources of energy, of course, these are primary sources of energy that they supply energy to the animals. But then we also have their waste products or alternatives that can equally, but not at the same level as these materials, supply energy to pigs. And of course, we'll be doing that also in the course of this webinar. All right, so that's all about energy. Okay, pigs require energy in good quantities to enable them carry out their daily functioning and grow properly. The next nutrient we will be talking about is protein and amino acids. Okay, because of course there might be a little bit of confusion about protein and amino acids. Amino acids, of course, are the building blocks of protein. Okay, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So we have protein-based feed ingredients, but when it comes to intake and absorption, it is broken down into amino acids. So that's just the real difference. We have ingredients that supply protein, okay, and then once the animal consumes and absorbs that protein, it is broken down into amino acids. So that's essentially the key difference. So we have two main sources of protein. We have the animal source of protein and we have the plant-based source of protein. Of course, when we talk about plant-based source of protein, we're talking about protein that we find from plants. And some of these include things like soya bean. On the screen, you see soya meal there. But in essence, soya bean can be processed into different forms that's suitable for pig consumption. You can have soya meal, you can have full fat soya, okay? Those are different ways of just breaking down soya for pig consumption. And then you have things like sesame cake, you have things like granite cake. These are sources of plant protein. And then we also have the sources of animal protein. Sources of animal protein include fish meal, which basically is gotten from fish. You have blood meal, which are like the blood plasma of cow, gotten from cow after slaughtering. Farmers collect the blood, process the blood by cooking it or drying it, and then including it in the feed as a protein source. And then we also have things like bone meal that supplies a moderate level of protein. Okay, what we should take note is that each of these sources of protein have varying levels of crude protein or varying levels of protein. There are some feed ingredients that have high levels of protein. There are some that have low levels of protein. Some are just in between. When it comes to protein or amino acids, which is what the animal is able to absorb, we have two types. We have limiting and we have non-limiting amino acids. Okay, so when we talk about limiting amino acids, we're actually referring to amino acids that have to be provided in the diet for normal growth. Okay, so you might give your pig soya meal, for instance, but then some of these things we call limiting amino acids are not found in sufficient quantities in the soya meal, and so you need to provide it in supplemental form, introduce it in supplemental form into the pig diet. Okay, on the screen you'll see some of the types of limiting amino acids. We have lysine, we have methionine, we have threonine, we have tryptophan, we have arginine, we have histidine, and so on. We have about 10 or thereabout limiting amino acids. Of course, the most popular and the most important limiting amino acids there is lysine and also methionine. Okay, so that's something you need to look out for. Now we also have non-limiting amino acids. Okay, non-limiting amino acids are acids that can easily be synthesized by the animal. So the protein you have you are giving to the animal from the animal can easily absorb these amino acids, so you don't really need to provide any form of supplemental inclusion in their diets. Okay, so this is important, and we'll have an extensive discussion on the role of limiting amino acids. Okay, but this is just something you need to bear in mind as we proceed in the conversation. Okay, so we've talked about limiting and non-limiting amino acids. The next thing we'll look at is also vitamin. So vitamins now fall within what we call trace nutrients or micronutrients. Of course, they are required by pigs in minute quantities. We have some kinds of vitamins like vitamin B, vitamin K, vitamin E, riboflavin or ascorbic acid. These are some types of vitamins. Now, as a pig farmer, when you are doing your homegrown feed formulation, of course you can't start going to the feed mill or the market to buy vitamin K, vitamin B, and so on and so forth. So what we find in the market for pig farmers is what we call a premix, and the premix is usually it contains all of these vitamins in the right proportion, and you include it in the feed, of course, in minute quantities, often between 0.1 to 0.2% inclusion in your feed. Okay. The next one is minerals. So minerals, just like vitamins, are needed in minute quantities. You don't really need too much minerals. You need them in minute quantities. One of the most important mineral you actually want to keep an eye for is calcium and phosphorus. Calcium and phosphorus takes care of bone mineralization. What do we mean by bone mineralization? We're talking about strengthening the bones and also improving general animal growth. So you actually want to look at getting supplemental calcium and phosphorus to include directly in your animal feed. But of course, just like vitamin, mineral are available in premix also. So sometimes you can find both vitamin and mineral premix at the same time. But for calcium and phosphorus, when people use dicalcium phosphorus, also called DCP, you may have to get this separately and include, because the inclusion level is usually relatively higher than what you get from the premix solution. Okay. The next one, of course, is the fat. So essentially, fat provides energy to pigs. Fat enables pigs to, provides lubrication during the mastication and swallowing process when they are eating their food. Um, Most of the feed ingredients that you have already contain fat. Things like maize, there's fat in maize, fatty acids in maize, and also for farmers who use palm kernel cake, especially palm kernel cake that is locally processed, you find that it has a little bit of fat. So what fat consists of is basically a dense form of energy, and if you can actually include fat in your feed, is actually a very good solution. Lastly, and this is one area that a lot of farmers tend to overlook: water. Water is important. Pigs should have free access to water all day. Free access to water all day. And if you look at the picture on your screen, you'd actually see a pig drinking water from a nipple drinker. I think we have gone past the level where we put water on the ground, or just in a small secluded part on the ground for pigs to eat, drink rather. We've gone past this level. We want to be able to use things like nipple drinkers so the pigs can have access to clean water all through the day, and that is very important for their growth. So when we talk about water, of course, water intake usually varies. Okay, so pigs that are sick may consume less, or in other situations may consume more water. Um, Pigs that when the weather is hot, of course, water intake might definitely increase. Also, depending on the physiological condition of the pigs, they might require a whole lot of water. For instance, lactating sows require a good level of water relative to other categories of animals. So, the bottom line, as a farmer, you should be able to create a system that would have running water in the farm delivered through the nipple drinkers to ensure that it is clean and it is fit for pig consumption. Okay, so we've basically done the nutrient needs of pigs. And these are some of the things you need to keep in mind. So you know now that these are the nutrient requirements of pigs. But then, when we now go to the next section, we'll now discover that each of these pig has varying demands for some of these nutrients. Okay, so we look at the nutrient requirement of pigs based on their physiological states. Based on their physiological states. So when we talk about nursery pigs, of course, we're talking about pigs that have just been newly weaned from the sow, and then they have to be replaced on a starter diet. When people talk about starter diet, let's not confuse ourselves. Crib feed, which is feed that is provided to piglets that are still with the sow, and not starter feeds. Okay, so we have starter diets and we have pig diets. Okay, so farm compounded feeds. Of course, as a farmer, you have different ways of providing this feed to pigs. You can buy ready-made feed on the shelf from a reputable feed mill company. It's a solution. But if you want to aggregate some of these feed ingredients, source, aggregate, compound these feed ingredients on your own, then this is a section that will definitely interest you. Also, there need to be high level of energy. Okay, there need to be high level of energy in your starter diet. You should be able to combine both the animal and the plant source of protein in your diet. Okay, so when we said animal and plant source of protein, typically I recommend fish meal as an animal source of protein for your newly weaned pigs or pigs that are in the nursery. And then, okay, you can actually add soya meal. Okay, so that's when we talk about combining. Of course, this combination is done at different levels. So of course, you have to use supplemental lysine in good quantities. One thing about lysine inclusion, for it tends to drops as the animal grows. So of course, newly weaned pigs might require more lysine than other categories of animals. So that's one thing you need to look at. Okay, and we said avoid or minimize the use of feed alternatives for starter pigs. I think from a financial point of view, starter diet is usually relatively more expensive than other the cost you're going to incur in feeding other category of pigs, and that is because we encourage you to use the primary feed ingredients, trying to look at go for feed alternatives. Okay, for instance, farmers might want to replace maize with maize bran, or not just, yeah, of course, replace maize with maize bran is not really advisable. Okay, so starter pigs, avoid or minimize the use of feed alternatives. Also, you need to properly process and store starter feed because of the issue of mycotoxin. Now, mycotoxin is something we're going to discuss in the course of this lesson. So you actually want to ensure that you process your feed properly. There is an Excel sheet on the screen. I wonder if we can see it properly. I've lifted this off from feedstrategy.com. It's a feed formulation. I know at the beginning I said there is no ideal type feed formulation, but there are some lessons we can actually get from other feed formulation. And so in this feed formulation, you see the feed is compounded up to 100%. That's about 1,000. So if you are compounding your feed, you actually want to approximate it to 100 kilo or 1,000 kilo. Farmers who do fractions, it's not really, it becomes a little bit difficult for you to arrive at the right inclusion level. It's something you can do, but to keep it simple, it's best you approximate it up to 100 or 1,000 kg. So the energy level is quite high, over 60%. The energy level is quite high, over 60%. There is the inclusion of soya meal, Soya meal has about 44 to 45% crude protein. It's actually rich in protein. Um, so the key lesson here, of course, is how energy is being used, the extent of the inclusion of energy. And we have seen energy inclusion reaching up to 60%, which is actually decent for starter pigs. One thing we should actually realize is pigs that are just newly weaned from the sow require all the energy they can get. Remember that they were, just before you wean them, they were on sow milk, which is actually rich in energy, and then you are now taking them off sow milk and placing them on dry feed. So whatever, and of course their feed intake is usually very low. They eat in grams, very very low. So you want to make sure that what you are giving to them is a full diet, and that is why we always advise farmers to invest in your starter diet. Um, you have your energy levels up to 60%. You have your protein levels up to 22%. So you can decide, of course, to use one protein ingredient, okay, to supply the protein nutrients or the amino acids nutrients, or you can combine. You can take about 7 to 8% of fish meal, and then you take another plant source, plant-based protein. So it's an option that is open to you. I actually recommend combining both the plant and animal source of protein. And then your lysine levels, of course, have to be very high. It could be as high as 0.2%. Okay, it could be as high as 0.2%. You need to have DCP, calcium and phosphorus in their diet, usually up to about 1% of the diet. You need to have high levels of calcium and phosphorus in the diet. You also need to have other feed additives. Okay, I recommend the use of toxin binders to take care of problems you might encounter with the quality of feed ingredients you are using. Of course, toxins might not necessarily creep as a result of how you are processing the feed. Toxins might come from the feed ingredient itself, the way it was stored, or most times the way it was delivered to the farm. Okay, so you might have some of these challenges. So to avoid these challenges, you usually recommend that you use toxin binders. You use your vitamin and mineral premix. That is actually very important, up to about 0.15% or 0.2%. So when you look at this clearly, you see that you're going to make a lot of investment in nursery pigs. Okay, and then even from the Excel sheet here, some farms have different types of starter diets. So and this is usually based on the weight of the animal. Depending on the weight at which you weigh the animal, some farms have starter diet that targets maybe 8 kilo to 12 kilo. They have another starter diet that targets maybe 12 to 16 kilo, and then another one that targets maybe 16 to maybe 25 kilo. But if you want to put all of this together and establish an average, you actually have to put in more, invest more to get the right kind of feed ingredient. Usually, it is advisable that you go for maize, you go for or wheat. Okay, why maize is advisable is because maize still has a decent level of protein, about 8% protein in maize. So these are some of the options you have. So if you are compounding, you're doing a farm solution for your starter diet, you might actually want to use maize, use soya meal, use fish meal. You can actually use blood meal up to around 5 or 6% in that particular diet. So that's just a general overview. Like I said, every farmer has unique and peculiar situation, and so we can't just copy and paste a solution from the internet. We're just doing this to review and look at the templates that has been established. All right. So after starter diets for nursery pigs, we move over to grower pigs. Okay. So some of the questions you might have is, at what point does a pig transit from a nursery pig to a grower pig? Usually we always make this kind of analysis based on the weight of the animal. Okay, some farmers maybe after using their starter diets for 2 or 3 weeks they immediately switch to a grower feed. Okay, the reality is that switch, or whatever switch you make in terms of feed, it has to be done based on the weight of the animal. So if, for example, you wean your pigs at 8 kilo and then you place them on a starter diet, you are looking at keeping them on the starter diet till they get to a point between maybe 20 to 25 kg, where you can now start placing them on grower feed. Okay, that is important. That is important because if you switch feed on starter or nursery pigs, you might run into a situation where they become stunted. So you actually want to avoid that by being steadfast in providing them quality nutrients via the starter diets. Now with grower pigs, you have a little bit of allowance to incorporate a number of feed waste products. You have that allowance. You can look for feed waste products that are quality and can supply this nutrients that you want. Okay, so of course supplemental lysine is recommended, but not like it was included in your starter diet. So with grower pigs, the supplemental lysine level will definitely drop a bit. You are now incorporating a number of waste or byproducts. Therefore, you have to use toxin binders. Toxin binders is largely recommended for grower pigs. Remember this: quality and quantity of feed is recommended for fast growth. Quality. So whatever feed ingredients or byproducts you're using has to be quality. If you're using a byproduct or a feed waste product, you have to know how to process it to get best to expose the nutrients in it and to make sure it's something that the pigs can digest. Okay, so the quality is important and also the quantity. Okay, so these pigs, for instance, you're trying to get them to market size, so you actually want to feed your animals properly. Okay, so still on Excel we lifted up from feed strategy. You can see that the energy levels dropped a bit, but not significantly, and this is where the farmer can leverage and introduce other energy giving waste products. I'll just give you an inkling. Okay, for instance, cassava tuber, of course, is the main feed ingredient, but the other cassava waste products that can be gotten for cheap. The reality or the problem is you need to know how to process these items properly. So I think we'll come to a section where we'll talk about feed alternatives, some of the feed alternatives, and we'll also look deeply into the issue of processing, because it's one thing to get a byproduct, it's actually another thing to process and apply it to get the best results. Alright, so the last thing we'll be discussing for this installment of this video is finisher pigs. So when we talk about finisher pigs, we're talking about pigs that maybe are approaching about 55 to 60 kilo, and they will soon be going to the market. Just like I said, I think I should chip this in. It is important to target the different physiological state of pigs. It is not just important from a nutrition point of view, it is important from an economic point of view. So you actually want to go in and feed quality feed, and then as the animals grow and become a little bit fiber tolerant, that means they can digest fiber, you may want to include quality fiber sources in their feed. That is the whole idea of having a finisher feed formula, because the animal can now digest fiber, and of course fiber based feed ingredients are the cheapest. Okay, so you can increase a little bit your fiber level in finisher pigs and get this result. Of course, in finisher pigs, your inclusion of most of these feed additives, supplemental lysine, will definitely drop. Okay, will definitely drop. So you can save cost by minimizing the use of feed alternatives. Of course, finisher pigs that you are ready for the market, you should be able to provide feed on an hourly basis, or based on the intake level of the animal. So I see no sense in you are preparing pigs for the market and then you are rationing the feed to the animals. You're giving them maybe 1 kilo or 2 kilo a day. You actually want to feed the animals to their fill so that you minimize your time to market. So finisher period is a period where you can actually save cost and make good investment at this period. Okay, so that'll be all for this installment of this video. In the next section, we are going to go. We're going to complete this nutrient requirements of pigs based on their physiological state. We'll talk about gestating. We'll talk about lactating, and we'll talk about feeding pigs, feeding breeding pigs, which basically pigs that are being fed for breeding purposes. We place them on maintenance ration. We'll go into this, and then most importantly, we'll look at the feed alternatives for pigs. This is an important area for many small old farms in Nigeria. We'll talk about some of the strategies you can deploy to enhance efficient feed intake and conversion, and then we'll make some recommendations. If you found this video interesting, make sure you like and follow the page so that you can turn on your notifications so you can get notification for the next installment of this video. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.